In a galaxy where diverse civilizations coexist, an alien diplomat, burdened with deep-seated contempt for humans due to their destructive tendencies, is tasked with overseeing a critical peace negotiation between her people and humans. Amidst the tense negotiations, she encounters a determined human envoy who begins to challenge her long-held prejudices, sparking the beginning of her emotional transformation. As they navigate cultural barriers and political tensions, they discover a bond that grows deeper, leading to a romantic relationship that could reshape the future of their civilizations. And so, the story begins. Aranya stepped off the transport shuttle and onto the landing bay of the diplomatic outpost orbiting Ishur. The air was thick with tension, a palpable blend of the unease that permeated this place. The outpost, a colossal structure hanging in the void, was a testament to the uneasy alliance it represented. Its design was a jarring amalgamation of organic curves and sharp metallic lines, a fusion of her tribe's nature-inspired architecture and the human's industrial efficiency. To her, it was a constant reminder of everything she despised about this arrangement. As she walked through the corridors, her expression remained cold and unreadable. The humans she passed gave her a wide berth, their faces betraying the respect or perhaps fear they held for her. Aranya was known throughout the galaxy for her sharp mind and unwavering dedication to her people, and for her contempt for humans. In the central conference room, the human envoys were already gathered, their stiff postures revealing their discomfort. Aranya entered with her second-in-command, Naira, at her side, her presence immediately commanding attention. The room was as divided as the factions it represented, one half bathed in the soft, natural light of her tribe's design, the other half harshly lit by the humans' bright fluorescence. Aranya took her place at the head of the table, her eyes narrowing slightly as she surveyed the humans before her. Liam, the lead human envoy, stood and offered a slight bow, a gesture of respect he knew would be appreciated by her people. "Ambassador Aranya," he began, his voice measured and calm, "we are honored by your presence." Aranya's response was curt. Let us proceed. She had no time for pleasantries, especially not with humans. As the negotiations began, her tone remained cool, every word calculated to assert her tribe's superiority. The humans spoke of resource allocations and trade agreements, but Aranya's mind was elsewhere. She was here to protect her tribe's interests, not to indulge in the humans' naive belief that they were equals. Liam attempted several times to engage her, his approach respectful yet persistent. "Ambassador, I understand the concerns of your people, but perhaps we could find a way to." "You will find," Aranya interrupted, her voice sharp, "that my people do not easily bend to human customs, envoy." Liam held her gaze for a moment longer than was comfortable before nodding. "Of course," he replied, though his tone held a note of something Aranya couldn't quite place. Was it understanding, or something else entirely? The first round of negotiations concluded with little progress. As Aranya and Naira returned to their quarters, Naira voiced what they were both thinking. "They are not like us, Aranya. Trust is a luxury we cannot afford." Aranya nodded, but her thoughts were already turning inward. In the privacy of her quarters, surrounded by the lush greenery of her homeworld that she had insisted on bringing with her, she allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. Her contempt for humans had deep roots, nurtured by years of watching them blunder through the galaxy, ignorant of the damage they caused. They were primitive, selfish, and unworthy of the respect they so desperately sought. And yet there was something about this Liam that gnawed at her. He was different from the others, more perceptive, perhaps, or simply more determined to understand her. But it didn't matter. Her duty was clear, and her personal feelings were irrelevant. Meanwhile, in his own quarters, Liam sat in quiet contemplation. Aranya was a puzzle, one he was determined to solve. He had seen the way she carefully guarded her words, as if each one carried a weight that he couldn't begin to understand. "There's more to her coldness than meets the eye," he mused aloud, determined to find a way through the barrier she had erected between them. The next day, the negotiations resumed, but a small cultural misunderstanding soon escalated the tension. One of the human envoys made an offhand comment, seemingly harmless, but it struck a nerve in Aranya. The room grew colder as she stared down the offending envoy, her eyes narrowing into slits. "You would do well to remember," she said icily, "that your words carry weight in this chamber." The human paled, stammering an apology, but the damage was done. The rift between the two sides deepened, and Aranya's contempt for them solidified further. Liam observed the exchange with quiet frustration, sensing that they were losing what little ground they had gained. As the day drew to a close, Liam made one final attempt to connect with Aranya. He approached her cautiously, offering a small token, a delicately crafted pendant, a symbol of peace from his culture. A gesture of goodwill, he explained, his tone sincere. Aranya glanced at the pendant, her expression unreadable. She said nothing, simply turned and walked away, leaving Liam standing there, holding the pendant. But later, in the solitude of her quarters, she found herself looking at the pendant again, her mind turning over the day's events. There was no room for sentimentality in her role, but she couldn't deny the seed of curiosity that had been planted. As she prepared for the next day's negotiations, Aranya steeled herself. The humans were persistent, she would give them that. But they would learn, as all others had before them, that her people did not bend. Tomorrow would be no different. The Garden of Peace was a rare sanctuary within the outpost, a place designed to bring together the disparate elements of human and alien cultures. The air here was cooler, the sense of hybrid flora, a mix of human and alien species mingling in a way that was almost disorienting. Aranya stood in the center of the garden, her eyes narrowing as she took in the alien elements that, despite their beauty, felt foreign and invasive. Liam arrived shortly after, his demeanor as calm as ever. "Ambassador," he greeted, with a nod, before gesturing to a nearby bench. "Shall we?" Reluctantly, Aranya sat, though her posture remained stiff. The tension between them was palpable, a chasm that the garden's tranquility could not bridge. Liam, undeterred, began with a topic that he hoped would ease the strain. "This garden was designed as a symbol of our cooperation," he said, gesturing to the plants around them. "Each species here was carefully selected to represent the unity we seek." Aranya's gaze shifted to a particularly vibrant flower, its petals an iridescent blue that reminded her of the oceans on her homeworld. "Unity is a fragile thing, easily shattered," she replied, her tone devoid of warmth. Liam regarded her for a moment before reaching into his pocket and retrieving a small object. He held it out to her, a token, similar to the one he had offered before, but this time more personal. It was a small carving made from a rare stone native to Ishur and adorned with symbols from both their cultures. "A peace offering," he said softly, "from one ambassador to another." Aranya stared at the carving, her expression unreadable. "I do not require your gifts," she said, though her voice lacked its usual sharpness. Liam smiled, though it was tinged with sadness. "It's not about requirement, ambassador. It's about understanding." For a moment, the silence between them was heavy, pregnant with unspoken words. Then, without another word, Aranya took the carving in hand. She did not thank him, but the gesture spoke louder than words. As they continued to talk, the conversation drifted towards their respective cultures. It was a cautious exchange, each revealing only what was necessary, but as they spoke, an unexpected commonality emerged. A shared symbol, present in both their traditions, though interpreted differently. It was a small thing, but it was enough to give Aranya pause. Later, in the privacy of the observation deck, Aranya found herself turning the carving over in her hands, her thoughts conflicted. This shared symbol, it was more than just a coincidence. It was a link, however tenuous, between their peoples. And yet, to acknowledge this connection would be to acknowledge that perhaps, just perhaps, her contempt was misplaced. "Curiosity is a weakness," she muttered to herself, clenching the carving tightly. "It invites doubt where there should be none." But doubt had already begun to creep in, and it was unsettling. Aranya was not one to waver, but this Liam, he was different. His approach was disarming in its sincerity, and she found herself struggling to maintain her distance. The moment was interrupted by a sudden alarm. A minor crisis had arisen, an unexpected malfunction in one of the outpost systems, threatening to compromise the fragile balance they had worked so hard to maintain. Aranya and Liam were forced to work together to resolve the issue, their combined efforts a rare display of cooperation that did not go unnoticed by those around them. In the aftermath, as the situation stabilized, they found themselves alone again, the tension between them momentarily eased by the crisis. Liam took the opportunity to speak, his voice low and earnest. Perhaps there is more we share than we realize, if we're willing to look. Aranya's response was guarded. You are too eager to find common ground, Liam. My duty demands that I remain vigilant. And yet Liam replied, his gaze steady, you took the carving. Aranya had no answer for that. Instead, she turned away, her mind a whirl of conflicting emotions. The seed of doubt had taken root, and try as she might, she could not shake it. But she also could not afford to let it grow. Liam watched her go, his resolve hardening. He had seen a crack in her cold exterior, however small, and he was determined to widen it. I'll find a way to reach her, he whispered to himself, even if it takes time. As the day drew to a close, Aranya stood alone on the observation deck, staring out at the vastness of space. The stars, so distant and cold, mirrored the isolation she felt within herself. And yet, for the first time, she wondered if perhaps that isolation was not as impenetrable as she had always believed. The tension that had begun to thaw between Aranya and Liam during their shared efforts was quickly shattered by the discovery of the deep caverns beneath a shore. These caverns, rich with resources, were not merely geological formations to Aranya's tribe, they were sacred, entwined with the very essence of their culture and history. When human scientists stumbled upon these caverns, ignorant of their significance, they unknowingly ignited a firestorm. Aranya learned of the discovery while in her quarters, surrounded by the lush greenery that she had brought from her homeworld. Naira, her second in command, had delivered the news with a mixture of urgency and outrage. The humans had desecrated something sacred, something that should never have been touched. Fury roiled within Aranya as she stormed through the corridors of the outpost, her mind filled with images of humans trampling over the ancient symbols carved into the cavern's walls. By the time she reached the central hall where the diplomats convened, she was a tempest of barely restrained anger. You desecrate what you do not understand, Aranya spat as she confronted the human envoys. The room fell silent, the weight of her words hanging heavily in the air. The human diplomats shifted uncomfortably, unprepared for the full force of Aranya's ire. Liam stepped forward, his expression troubled but composed. Ambassador Aranya, I assure you, the discovery was made in ignorance. We had no knowledge of the significance of those caverns to your people. Your ignorance is no excuse, Aranya retorted, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. You have violated something sacred, something beyond your comprehension. Liam's eyes softened with understanding, and he spoke with a sincerity that disarmed her, if only slightly. Let us make amends before it's too late. We can work together to protect these caverns from further harm. Aranya hesitated, her anger warring with a nascent respect for Liam's willingness to admit fault. She had expected denial or deflection, not this open offer of cooperation. It unsettled her, and she found herself grappling with the notion that perhaps Liam's intentions were genuine. That night, unable to sleep, Aranya decided to see the caverns for herself. She donned a cloak to obscure her identity and slipped out of the outpost undetected. The journey to the human research station was fraught with internal conflict. Every step closer to the station heightened her sense of betrayal, but it also fueled a growing curiosity. The research station was sterile, its cold, white walls a stark contrast to the warm earthiness of the caverns below. Aranya moved silently through the facility, her presence unnoticed by the humans absorbed in their work. She reached the entrance to the caverns, a gaping maw that led into the depths of the planet, and descended alone into the darkness. The air grew cool and damp as she ventured deeper, the soft glow of luminescent crystals guiding her way. The caverns were as sacred as she had imagined, the walls adorned with ancient carvings that spoke of her people's history. She felt a profound connection to the place, a spiritual resonance that grounded her even as her thoughts remained in turmoil. As she explored further, Aranya came upon something unexpected: human equipment, carefully positioned, seemingly respectful of the space. And among the carvings, she noticed something else: symbols that bore an uncanny resemblance to those found in human cultures. Her breath caught in her throat. This was more than a simple excavation, this was evidence of a shared past, a link between her people and the humans. Perhaps there is more to these humans than I care to admit, Aranya thought, her mind racing with the implications of this discovery. The following day, Aranya approached Liam with a guarded demeanor, her emotions carefully concealed. She recounted her findings in the caverns, her voice steady but laced with underlying tension. Liam listened intently, his brow furrowing as she described the symbols. "This could be a turning point," Liam said quietly. "Together we can protect what matters most to both our peoples." Aranya's gaze hardened. "Do not mistake this for trust, Liam. I will not let your people exploit what is sacred to mine." "Nor would I," Liam replied, his voice firm. "We must work together, or all will be lost." Reluctantly, Aranya agreed to an uneasy alliance. They would work together to protect the caverns from exploitation by more aggressive factions on both sides. The days that followed were tense, with Aranya constantly battling her instinct to keep Liam at arm's length, even as they collaborated. Yet, with each passing day, her respect for him grew. He was not like the other humans she had encountered. He was patient, thoughtful, and genuinely committed to preserving what was sacred. But their progress did not go unnoticed. Whispers of discontent began to circulate within both their societies. Some saw their cooperation as a betrayal, a dangerous deviation from tradition. The seeds of conflict were sown, and Aranya knew that their fragile alliance was at risk. Aranya stared out at the planet below, her thoughts in turmoil. The caverns had revealed a connection she could not ignore, but she feared the consequences of acknowledging it. Respect for Liam had taken root, but with it came the realization that her contempt for humans might not be as justified as she had always believed. The next day, as Aranya and Liam met once more to discuss their plans, the tension between them was palpable. They both knew that their alliance was fragile, and that the external pressures they faced could easily tear it apart. But for now, they were united by a shared purpose, even as the world around them threatened to descend into chaos. As Aranya left the meeting, she could not shake the feeling that something had shifted within her. The respect she had begun to feel for Liam was a crack in the foundation of her beliefs, and she knew that if it continued to grow, it would force her to confront everything she had ever known. The Grand Council chamber was an imposing place, its towering pillars and intricate carvings reflecting the weight of the decisions made within its walls. Today it was filled with representatives from both Aranya's tribe and the human delegation, all gathered to address the escalating tensions sparked by the discovery of the sacred caverns. Aranya stood at the head of the chamber, her posture rigid as she listened to the heated debates that filled the room. The discovery of the caverns had ignited a firestorm, with both sides preparing for the possibility of conflict. Her tribe's leaders were pressuring her to take a hardline stance, to defend their sacred sites at all costs. "We must not allow the humans to desecrate our heritage," one of the tribal leaders declared, his voice echoing through the chamber. "They cannot be trusted." Aranya remained silent, her thoughts in turmoil. Her loyalty to her tribe was unquestionable, but the events of the past few days had sown seeds of doubt. Liam's words lingered in her mind. There was another way, a path that did not lead to destruction. Before she could speak, Liam stepped forward, his voice cutting through the tension. "We do not seek to harm what is sacred to you," he began, his tone measured. "There is a way to protect the caverns while allowing for peaceful collaboration. Let us find a solution together." Aranya could feel the eyes of her people on her, waiting for her to reject Liam's proposal. But something within her had changed. She hesitated, her voice faltering for the first time in the chamber. "Perhaps there is another way." The room fell silent, the shock palpable. Her words were met with disbelief, especially from her own leaders. One of them, an elder who had guided her since her youth, stepped forward, his face stern. "You are straying from your duty, Aranya. Do not let these humans corrupt your judgment." The words stung, cutting deeper than she had anticipated. Aranya's gaze flickered to Liam, who stood quietly, his expression unreadable. In that moment she felt the full weight of her position, the impossible choice laid before her. She could uphold her duty to her tribe, maintaining the distance that had always defined their relationship with humans, or she could follow the path that Liam had offered, a path that might lead to peace, but at the cost of her standing among her people. Aranya clenched her fists, her mind racing. "I will not blindly follow a path that leads to destruction," she said, her voice gaining strength. "But I will not abandon what is sacred to us either. We must find a way to protect our heritage without resorting to violence." Liam stepped closer, his voice soft yet resolute. "There's another way, Aranya. Together we can find it." The elder's eyes narrowed, his voice cold. "You are betraying your people." Before Aranya could respond, an alarm blared through the chamber, its shrill tones signaling an immediate threat. The war room, a strategic command center within the outpost, had detected an unexpected attack. A rogue faction intent on exploiting the caverns for their own gain had launched a surprise assault. The chamber erupted into chaos, leaders from both sides shouting orders as the realization of the attack sank in. Aranya and Liam exchanged a brief, determined glance before sprinting towards the war room, their differences momentarily set aside in the face of a common enemy. As they reached the war room, the scale of the attack became clear. The rogue faction, composed of mercenaries and radicals from both species, was making a direct assault on the caverns, aiming to seize control of the sacred site for their own purposes. "We have to stop them," Aranya said, her voice steely with resolve. "If they succeed, everything we've worked for will be lost." Liam nodded, his expression grim. "We can't let that happen." Together they coordinated a desperate defense, rallying forces from both their peoples to repel the attackers. The battle was fierce, the cavern's sacred walls trembling under the onslaught of weapons and explosives. Aranya fought with a ferocity born of desperation, her determination to protect her heritage fueling every strike. Liam fought alongside her, his presence a steady anchor amidst the chaos. As the battle raged on, they found themselves cornered in one of the caverns, the rogue faction pressing in on all sides. "This might be it," Liam said, his voice strained but resolute. "If it's my life for yours, Aranya, then it's a trade I'd make 1,000 times over." Aranya's eyes flashed with anger and something else, fear. "No, we fight together, or we fall together. I will not let you sacrifice yourself for me." In that moment, something shifted between them, an unspoken bond solidified by the heat of battle. They fought with renewed vigor, and just when all seemed lost, reinforcements arrived, members from both societies who believed in their cause, who refused to let the caverns fall into the wrong hands. The tide of the battle turned, the rogue faction driven back by the combined forces of humans and Aranya's tribe. As the last of the attackers fled, Aranya and Liam stood side by side, breathless and battered but victorious. The immediate threat had passed, but the battle had taken its toll. Aranya knew that the real battle was just beginning, the battle to reconcile her duty to her people with the path she knew she must take. As they returned to the Grand Council chamber, the atmosphere was tense. Aranya faced her tribe's leaders, her voice unwavering as she defended her decision to cooperate with Liam. "We protected what is sacred to us," she declared. "But we did so together. This is the path forward." The elder looked at her with a mixture of disappointment and grudging respect. "You have chosen a difficult road, Aranya." "I chose the only road that does not lead to ruin," she replied firmly. As the council session ended, Aranya and Liam's alliance was solidified, though both knew they would face backlash from their respective societies. The breaking point had been reached, and Aranya had made her choice. She had rejected the path of blind loyalty, and had embraced the possibility of a future where understanding, not contempt, guided their actions. But as Aranya left the chamber, she couldn't shake the feeling that the hardest battles were yet to come. Her alliance with Liam had been forged in fire, but whether it would withstand the storms ahead was a question that only time would answer. The sacred caverns of HFY had always been a place of profound reverence for Aranya's people, but now they held an even deeper significance. The battle that had raged within their depths had not only scarred the ancient walls, but had also left a mark on Aranya's heart. She returned to the caverns alone, seeking solace and clarity in the quiet, echoing chambers that had witnessed so much strife. The dim, flickering light of the luminescent crystals cast long shadows as she walked, her footsteps soft against the stone. The air was thick with the earthy scent of the mineral-rich ground, mixed with the faint aroma of incense left behind by her people during their rituals of cleansing. Aranya's mind was heavy with the weight of her recent choices that had set her on a path that diverged sharply from the traditions she had been raised to uphold. As she reached a particularly sacred chamber, Aranya knelt before an ancient stone carving that depicted the history of her people. She traced the intricate lines with her fingers, feeling the cool, smooth surface of the stone as she contemplated the journey that had brought her here. The alliance with Liam, the growing bond between them, and the dangers that lay ahead, all of it swirled in her thoughts, leaving her with a sense of unease. She was not alone for long. The soft sound of footsteps alerted her to another presence, and she turned to see Liam entering the chamber. He approached her quietly, his expression one of understanding. They had agreed to meet here, in this hidden sanctuary where prying eyes could not follow, to discuss the future of their fragile alliance. Aranya, Liam began, his voice low and filled with concern. "I've been doing some research. There's something you need to know." Aranya rose to her feet, her gaze steady as she met his eyes. "What is it?" Liam reached into his cloak and pulled out a small, ancient artifact, an item that bore both the symbols of his people and those of hers. This was found in the deeper parts of the caverns, buried beneath layers of sediment. It suggests that our peoples were connected long before we ever imagined. Aranya took the artifact from his hands, turning it over carefully. The implications of this discovery were immense. It meant that their histories were intertwined, that the deep-seated animosity between their races might be based on misunderstandings and lost knowledge. The realization both intrigued and frightened her. "This changes everything," she whispered, more to herself than to Liam. "But it also complicates things. How can I ask my people to trust yours when we've been enemies for so long?" Liam stepped closer, his voice filled with quiet determination. "We can't change the past, Aranya, but we can shape the future. If we can show our people that our destinies are linked, that we share more than just this planet, we might be able to create a lasting peace." Aranya wanted to believe him, but doubt gnawed at her. She knew that there were those within her tribe who would see this as a betrayal of their values, a dangerous step toward assimilation. Yet, as she looked into Liam's eyes, she also saw the possibility of something greater, an opportunity to break the cycle of hatred and build something new. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of another figure, cloaked in shadow. Aranya tensed, but Liam remained calm. The figure stepped forward, revealing themselves to be a member of Aranya's tribe, one of the more progressive thinkers who had always quietly supported her efforts. "Ambassador Aranya," the figure said, their voice hushed, "not all of us are blind to the possibilities of change. There are those among us who believe in your vision, who are willing to support you in this endeavor." Aranya felt a wave of relief wash over her. The knowledge that she was not alone in her fight gave her the strength she needed to move forward. "Thank you," she replied softly, "but this will not be easy. The risks are great, and we must proceed carefully." The figure nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. "We are prepared to do what is necessary." With newfound resolve, Aranya turned back to Liam. "We must find a way to unite our people through shared rituals and cultural exchange. It's a dangerous proposal, but it's our best chance at peace." Liam smiled, his expression one of encouragement. "I believe in you, Aranya. Together we can change the course of history." The plan was set in motion with utmost secrecy. Aranya and Liam began organizing clandestine meetings between members of their respective societies, focusing on those who were more open to change. The first cultural exchange was held deep within the caverns, far from the eyes of those who would seek to disrupt their efforts. It was a tense affair, with participants from both sides wary of one another. But as the evening progressed, something remarkable happened. Walls began to crumble. Through shared stories, rituals, and the simple act of breaking bread together, the participants found common ground. For the first time, there was a glimmer of hope that their peoples could coexist peacefully. However, Aranya knew that this fragile peace was built on a foundation of secrecy. If their efforts were discovered too soon, it could lead to disaster. The threat of discovery loomed over them like a dark cloud, casting a shadow on their tentative steps toward unity. As the night drew to a close, Aranya and Liam stood together in the hidden sanctuary, reflecting on the success of the first cultural exchange. "The path ahead is treacherous," Aranya said, her voice laced with both determination and fear, "but it is the only one worth taking." Liam placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Whatever comes, we'll face it together." Aranya glanced at his hand on her shoulder, surprised by the comfort it brought. In the midst of their clandestine efforts and the looming threat of discovery, this simple touch grounded her. She realized with a start that she had come to rely on Liam not just as an ally, but as someone she trusted deeply. The thought was both comforting and terrifying. As the silence stretched between them, she found herself wanting to say more, to express the growing connection she felt. But the words caught in her throat, and she instead gave him a small, tentative smile. It was a gesture of gratitude, and perhaps something more, a silent acknowledgement of the bond they were forging, even if she wasn't ready to fully admit it yet. Despite the weight of the night's events, Aranya found herself feeling a rare sense of calm. The success of the cultural exchange had shown her that change was possible, even if it came with great risk. As she and Liam walked out of the hidden sanctuary together, she glanced at him, her mind turning over the events of the evening. "Thank you, Liam," she said softly, her voice carrying more than just gratitude. It was an acknowledgement of everything he had done, not just for their mission, but for her personally. He had become someone she could trust, someone who had shown her a different way to see the world. Liam met her gaze, and in his eyes she saw a reflection of the bond that had grown between them. "We're in this together, Aranya," he replied, his tone gentle yet resolute. "Whatever happens next, we'll face it side by side." In that moment, Aranya realized that her feelings for Liam had deepened in ways she hadn't fully understood until now. The path ahead was uncertain, but she knew she wouldn't have to walk it alone. Despite the success of the exchange, Aranya could not shake the feeling that their time was running out. The opposition within both societies was growing, and it was only a matter of time before their secret efforts were brought to light. But for now, they had taken the first steps toward a new future, one that held the promise of peace, but also the certainty of conflict. The central plaza of the outpost had always been a place of public gatherings, a grand, open space where announcements and ceremonies were held. Today, however, it had become the stage for a confrontation that would determine the fate of two civilizations. The secret cultural exchange had been discovered, and the news had spread like wildfire, igniting outrage among both humans and Aranya's tribe. Aranya and Liam stood in the center of the plaza, surrounded by an angry mob. Leaders from both sides had gathered, their faces twisted in expressions of betrayal and fury. The accusations flew fast and fierce, each word striking like a blow. "You've betrayed your people," Aranya, one of the tribal leaders, spat, his voice thick with venom. "We will not follow you down this path." Aranya's heart pounded in her chest, but she refused to back down. "I have not betrayed anyone," she declared, her voice strong and unwavering. "We cannot continue on this path of endless conflict." Liam stood beside her, his presence a steadying force. He knew that this was the moment of truth, the point where their alliance would either triumph or fall apart. The anger in the plaza was palpable, but there was something else, too, curiosity, and in some, the faintest glimmer of hope. In a dramatic move, Aranya stepped forward and took Liam's hand in hers. The gesture was simple, but its meaning was profound. "I love you, Liam," she said, her voice ringing out across the plaza, "and I will not let fear dictate our future." The crowd fell into a stunned silence. Aranya's confession shocked both humans and her tribe alike. For so long, she had been a symbol of cold, calculated diplomacy, a leader who harbored deep contempt for humans. To see her standing here, declaring her love for one, was a revelation that shook them to their cores. The silence was broken by a new voice, one filled with fury and righteousness. "This is Treason, the leader of the uprising." A staunch traditionalist from Aranya's tribe pushed through the crowd. "You've forsaken everything we stand for. You've allowed this human to corrupt you." Aranya's eyes flashed with defiance. "No, it is you who has forsaken our future by clinging to the past. This is our chance to create a future where our children need not fear each other." But the leader would not be swayed. With a shout, he rallied those who shared his views, and chaos erupted. The uprising began right there in the plaza, with Aranya and Liam at the center of the storm. Realizing the danger, Liam grabbed Aranya's hand and pulled her toward the hidden passageways, an ancient network of corridors that ran beneath the outpost, known only to a few. As they ran, the sounds of battle echoed through the halls, the clash of weapons and the shouts of the angry mob growing louder behind them. In the safety of the passageways, Liam looked into Aranya's eyes, his resolve clear. "We've come too far together for me to leave your side now." Aranya met his gaze, her grip on his hand firm. "Then we face this together, no matter what comes." The tension in the air was thick, the weight of their decisions pressing down on them. They knew that the uprising would not stop until one side had claimed victory, and that their love had made them targets. But they also knew that they could not give up, not now, when so much was at stake. As they moved deeper into the passageways, the sounds of the battle grew closer. The uprising had found them, and it was only a matter of time before they were forced to make their final stand. Aranya could feel the ancient stone walls grounding her, the rough texture a reminder of the history they were now a part of. The acrid scent of smoke and burning metal filled the air, mingling with the earthy scent of the passageways, a stark contrast to the peace they had sought to create. Just when it seemed that all was lost, help arrived. A group of warriors from both societies, those who believed in Aranya and Liam's cause, emerged from the shadows. They had not given up on the dream of unity and had come to fight for a future where that dream could become a reality. The battle that followed was fierce and desperate. The uprising fought with the ferocity of those who believed they were defending their very way of life, but the new alliance fought with the strength of conviction, with the belief that a better future was within their grasp. Amidst the chaos, Liam and Aranya found themselves back to back, defending each other as the battle raged around them. The bitter taste of blood and sweat filled Aranya's mouth as she fought, her every move driven by the determination to protect the man she loved and the future they had begun to build together. As the tide of the battle began to turn in their favor, Aranya was faced with a final, crucial decision. The leader of the uprising had been cornered, his forces dwindling. She could order his capture, which would likely lead to his execution, or she could offer him a chance to join them, to lay down his arms and embrace the new path. Her heart pounded in her chest as she considered the choice before her. Tradition dictated that traitors were shown no mercy, but Aranya knew that this moment could define the future they were fighting for. With a deep breath, she made her decision. "Lower your weapons," she commanded, her voice ringing out across the battlefield. "There has been enough bloodshed. I offer you a choice: join us, or leave this place in peace." The leader hesitated, his expression torn between anger and exhaustion. Finally, he dropped his weapon to the ground, signaling his surrender. One by one, the remaining members of the uprising followed suit, laying down their arms and accepting the offer of peace. The battle was over. The uprising had been quelled, and the new alliance had triumphed. As the dust settled, Aranya and Liam stood together in the center of the passageways, surrounded by the warriors who had fought beside them. The glow of the embers from the battle still flickered in the air, but a new light was beginning to shine, a light of hope, of a future forged in unity rather than division. Aranya turned to Liam, her heart full of emotion. "We did it," she whispered, her voice filled with awe and relief. Liam smiled, his eyes filled with love and pride. "We did it together." In that moment, Aranya knew that she had made the right choice. She had chosen love over fear, unity over division, and the future over the past. And as they stood there, amidst the remnants of the battle, she felt a sense of peace and fulfillment unlike anything she had ever known. The conflict had been resolved, but the journey was far from over. Together they would face the challenges ahead, but they would do so as equals, as partners, and as leaders of a new era for both their peoples. The outpost that had once been the center of so much tension and conflict was now a hive of activity. Reconstruction efforts were underway, and the sound of construction blended with the soft rustling of leaves in the newly planted Unity Garden. This garden, carefully cultivated with contributions from both Aranya's tribe and the humans, stood as a living symbol of the new beginning they had fought so hard to achieve. Aranya walked through the garden, her hand brushing lightly over the vibrant leaves of the plants that had been chosen to represent the harmony between their cultures. The air was thick with the fresh, earthy scent of newly turned soil, mingling with the delicate fragrance of blooming flowers. It was a reminder of how far they had come, but also of the challenges that still lay ahead. Liam joined her, his presence as reassuring as ever. Together, they oversaw the final preparations for the ceremony of unity, where members of both societies would come together to plant the first seeds of their shared future. The Unity Garden, with its carefully arranged rows of plants and the smooth, polished stone of a new monument at its center, was a place of hope, a place where their peoples could come together in peace. "We have come far," Aranya said quietly, her voice filled with both pride and a hint of weariness. "But the journey is just beginning." Liam nodded, his gaze steady as he looked out over the garden. "Whatever comes next, we will face it together." The ceremony began as the sun rose, casting a warm, golden light over the garden. Members of both societies gathered, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and cautious optimism. For some, the wounds of the past were still fresh, and the memory of the recent conflicts lingered. Yet there was also a sense of anticipation in the air, a collective hope that this moment could mark the start of something truly transformative. Aranya and Liam stood side by side as they addressed the crowd. Aranya's voice was clear and strong as she spoke of the journey that had brought them to this point, the battles fought, the sacrifices made, and the bonds forged in the fires of adversity. She spoke of the shared history they had uncovered, the realization that their destinies were intertwined long before they had ever met. And she spoke of the future they were building together, a future where unity, not division, would guide their path. "This garden will grow," Aranya declared, her eyes shining with conviction, "just as our unity will, nurtured by our commitment to each other." As the first seeds were planted, a sense of calm settled over the garden. The act was simple, but its significance was profound. Each seed represented a new beginning, a chance to heal the rifts that had long divided their peoples. The crowd watched in silence, their hearts heavy with the weight of the past but lightened by the promise of the future. After the ceremony, Aranya and Liam found a quiet moment alone in the garden. The reconstruction work continued around them, a hum of activity that underscored the ongoing transformation of the outpost. But in this moment, they allowed themselves to simply be together, in the place they had helped create. Aranya reached out to touch the smooth, cool surface of the monument that stood at the garden center. It was a tribute to those who had fought for this peace, a reminder of the sacrifices that had been made. "Not all of us are ready to forget the past," she murmured, her voice tinged with the weight of responsibility. Liam placed a hand over hers, his touch warm and steady. "We don't need to forget," he said softly, "but we can choose how we move forward." They stood there for a long time, taking in the sights and sounds of the garden. The soft rustling of leaves in the gentle breeze, the distant hum of construction, the scent of flowers blooming in the early morning light. It was a moment of peace, a moment where the future they had fought for felt within reach. But they both knew that the road ahead would not be easy. There were still those who resisted the changes they were working to implement, those who clung to the old ways and the divisions of the past. The challenges that lay ahead would test them in ways they could not yet foresee. But as they stood together in the Unity Garden, Aranya felt a deep sense of fulfillment, a sense that whatever came next, they would face it together. The day ended with a celebration, marking the official beginning of the new alliance. The Unity Garden, now filled with the first sprouts of the seeds planted that morning, was the heart of the festivities. Music from both cultures filled the air, and for the first time in a long time, there was laughter and joy shared between the two peoples. As the sun set and the garden was bathed in the soft glow of twilight, Aranya and Liam shared a traditional drink from both cultures. The sweet taste was a reminder of the victory they had achieved, a victory not just of battle, but of love, understanding, and unity. As they looked out over the garden, now filled with life and promise, they knew that the future was theirs to shape. Together they had forged a new path, one that would lead their peoples into an era of cooperation and mutual respect. The journey had been long and difficult, but the dawn of a new era was finally upon them.